worships strength. One blade refuses to break. They call him invincible. He calls it a promise. When the tide of violence rises, his vow becomes a storm. Baki-Dou, the Invincible Samurai. In a world where strength writes history, one man fights with his bare hands against a legend forged in steel. When the blade meets the fist, who remains standing? Invincible Samurai.
On a battlefield of endless war, one man stands against the impossible. Cut down but never broken, he sharpens his soul. When steel meets steel, legends are born. The Invincible Samurai. This is the fight of a lifetime.
Baki-Dou, the Invincible Samurai, is set to be one of the most intense, action-packed, and highly anticipated anime releases on Netflix worldwide on February 26th, 2026, and it represents a new era in the Baki franchise, bringing ancient legend, underground fighting culture, and raw, brutal martial arts spectacle to the screen with a level of intensity and narrative depth that pushes the boundaries of what modern anime can deliver. grounded in the long-running Baki saga created by Keisuke Itagaki and produced by TMS Entertainment, whose history with the franchise ensures continuity of style, quality, and character portrayal. The anime follows Baki Hanma, already one of the most powerful underground fighters after surviving the legendary father-son battle against his father, Yujiro Hanma, a confrontation that was long considered the ultimate culmination of strength in the series. And yet, what fans see in Baki-Dou is not a retreat from that legacy, but a bold escalation that brings together fighters across eras in a way that shakes the foundation of the world's understanding of combat and martial supremacy. The official Netflix synopsis reveals that the story picks up after Baki and other seasoned fighters find themselves engulfed by a sense of boredom following that climactic showdown, a boredom that speaks not only to the physical exhaustion of constant battle, but also to a psychological void left after confronting the ultimate opponent. And just as a sense of stagnation threatens to settle in, an ambitious and secretive experiment unfolds 364 meters beneath Tokyo Skytree, where scientists, pushed by obsession with strength that defies human limitations, succeed in reviving Miyamoto Musashi, the most legendary swordsman in Japanese history, through advanced cloning or scientific revival technology, setting the stage for a narrative that juxtaposes centuries-old sword mastery against contemporary underground arena combat, a clash that promises to redefine strength and technique in a world where fists have always been king, but where blades may prove to be not just equal opponents, but existential threats to everything the fighters believe they understand about martial arts and superiority. What makes Baki-Dou particularly unique compared to previous arcs, such as Baki the Grappler, Baki, and Baki Hanma, is this introduction of a cross-era conflict that doesn't simply rely on brute force exchanges, but reinvents the rules of engagement by allowing weapon-based combat in the underground arena, a space that for years had been dominated by empty-hand fight culture, where combatants measure strength, body conditioning, mental fortitude, and strategic mastery without metallic extensions. And now, with Musashi Miyamoto wielding sword techniques that combine historical sword fighting precision with unbelievable speed and power, the series adds a philosophical layer to the spectacle, questioning whether raw physical strength can truly withstand ancient weapon mastery, and whether fighters defined by their fists can adapt, evolve, or even survive against an opponent who treats combat as both art and existential philosophy. And the unfolding clashes are expected to be some of the most dynamic and technically fascinating sequences ever animated in the franchise. The cast assembled for this adaptation reflects both legacy and ambition. Longtime voice actors like Nobunaga Shimasaki as Baki Hanma and Akio Otsuka as Yujiro Hanma reprise their roles, ensuring continuity of character portrayals that fans have grown attached to over multiple anime iterations, while Naoya Uchida takes on the iconic role of Miyamoto Musashi, bringing with him a vocal presence capable of embodying both the ancient wisdom and deadly calm of the legendary samurai. And other characters, including stalwart fighters such as Doppo Orochi, Jack Hammer, Kaoru Hanayama, Goki Shibukawa, and Kaio Retsu, anchor the ensemble with familiar personalities, creating a roster that combines veteran underground champions with the unique threat of a revived historical legend whose techniques challenge everything they stand for in combat. Production details add another layer to the anticipation. TMS Entertainment, the studio responsible for previous Baki and Baki Hanma adaptations, returns with a team led by director Toshiki Hirano, series composition by Tatsuhiko Urahata, character design by Shingo Ishikawa, and music by Kenji Fujisawa, blending stylistic continuity with fresh creative energy that aims to make Baki-Dou stand out even among its predecessors, while the opening theme performed by Wanima and the ending theme by rapper Novelcore promise soundscapes that match the emotional and psychological intensity of the story, capturing the loneliness of strength, the raw thrill of combat, and the existential weight of facing an opponent who transcends time itself. In terms of release format and structure, Netflix has confirmed that all 13 episodes of Baki-Dou, the Invincible Samurai, will be available on February 26, 2026, simultaneously worldwide, allowing viewers to binge the entire arc at once, a format that suits intense action dramas and ensures that the narrative momentum built around Musashi's introduction, early battles, rising tension among fighters, evolving alliances, and climactic confrontations is experienced without interruption or delay, offering fans a high-impact viewing experience that feels both cinematic and binge-worthy. And this decision reflects Netflix's broader strategy of streaming exclusive international anime content that engages global audiences with high production values and culturally rich storytelling. From a fan expectation and critical perspective, Baki-Dou is shaping up to be a compelling continuation of the Baki saga, not simply trading on nostalgia, but expanding the franchise's boundaries by introducing cross-era conflicts, philosophical questions about the nature of strength, and narrative stakes that go beyond physical battles to examine the psychological drive for supremacy, legacy, and personal meaning. The clash between a resurrected samurai and the underground's strongest fighters encapsulates themes of tradition versus modernity, discipline versus adaptation, and instinct versus strategy, while the raw combat sequences, anticipated to be more visceral, technically complex, and thematically rich than previous arcs, showcase a new level of animation ambition and narrative scope for the series, making Baki-Dou, the Invincible Samurai, not only a must-watch for fans of Baki, but a formidable entry point for martial arts anime enthusiasts looking for high-impact action grounded in narrative depth and character evolution. As Baki-Dou stretches from parts 51 through 100, the narrative expands exponentially in both scope and complexity, building a universe where the exploration of human will, martial artistry, and psychological depth converges with increasingly high-stakes confrontations, and each episode layers intense combat sequences with philosophical, emotional, and cultural dimensions that challenge the characters' physical and mental boundaries while keeping the audience fully immersed in the logic, rhythm, and consequence of this meticulously constructed fighting world. As Baki Hanma, now more experienced yet still confronted with relentless pressure to evolve, navigates an arena transformed by the re-emergence of Musashi Miyamoto, whose centuries-old sword mastery, strategic insight, and philosophical approach to combat create not only physical threats, but also existential questions for every fighter in the underground circuits. And these episodes explore the profound contrast between historical mastery and contemporary physical supremacy, emphasizing how tradition, timing, instinct, and philosophy can sometimes outweigh brute force or raw physical conditioning, prompting every character to reassess assumptions about power, strategy, and personal growth. And the narrative does not shy away from examining the psychological impact of these confrontations, portraying in intricate detail how fear, anticipation, ego, pride, respect, humility, and the desire for legacy shape not only the choices fighters make in battle, but also their emotional landscapes outside the ring. And these nuanced portrayals elevate the series from a simple action spectacle to a profound meditation on the human condition under extreme stress and high stakes. Throughout these parts, secondary and tertiary characters receive sustained attention, their personal histories, motivations, and relational complexities being carefully unpacked to create a dense web of narrative interconnections that reinforce the central themes of the drama. And the drama explores alliances, rivalries, mentorships, grudges, and ideological contrasts, showing how social, cultural, and personal context informs every encounter and decision,
while also providing viewers with ample reflection on the interplay of individual ambition and collective legacy, and the way in which martial traditions, personal honor, and competitive culture intersect in life-or-death scenarios, all while preserving the kinetic excitement and narrative momentum of combat sequences. The visual storytelling in parts 101 through 180 becomes increasingly sophisticated, using advanced cinematographic techniques such as dynamic multi-angle sequences, slow-motion impact emphasis, detailed framing of expressions, and symbolic imagery that conveys not only the physical impact of blows, but also the emotional, psychological.
Baki-Dou is the pinnacle of the Baki franchise, a martial arts epic that takes viewers on an unparalleled journey through the physical, psychological, philosophical, and emotional dimensions of human strength, legacy, and mastery. Beginning with Baki Hanma, who, having survived his legendary battle with his father Yujiro, now faces challenges that transcend physical power and enter the realms of intellectual, ethical, and existential confrontation. And the narrative immediately introduces Musashi Miyamoto, the revived legendary samurai, whose centuries of disciplined sword mastery, strategic brilliance, philosophical insight, and spiritual resilience redefine the very concept of combat, creating tension and narrative stakes that extend beyond personal victory to questions of morality, legacy, and the ultimate meaning of human achievement. And this central conflict drives the entire arc of the story across all 200 parts, providing a scaffolding upon which all secondary, tertiary, and philosophical subplots are woven. And the complexity of these interactions demonstrates that Baki-Dou is as much an exploration of human consciousness, emotion, and social dynamics as it is a spectacle of extreme martial arts. And the narrative interleaves intense fight sequences with moments of reflective introspection, ethical debate, historical context, relational evolution, and psychological analysis, making every scene multi-layered and rich with meaning, while the visual presentation enhances the story through dynamic cinematography, sophisticated framing, symbolic lighting, and color theory that shifts with narrative tone, perspective, and thematic emphasis, creating a visually immersive experience that mirrors the complexity of the character's emotional, psychological, and ethical landscapes. And the soundtrack blends orchestral intensity, percussive aggression, electronic motifs, and ambient textures that align with fight tension, emotional depth, and philosophical contemplation, creating a fully multi-sensory storytelling experience. Throughout parts 1 through 200, Baki's evolution is portrayed with unparalleled nuance, depicting how his physical conditioning, reflexive agility, and combat intuition are inseparable from his psychological resilience, ethical reasoning, adaptability, strategic insight, and philosophical understanding of strength. And as Musashi engages the underground fighters, the narrative explores the collision between historical mastery and contemporary innovation, showing that each movement, tactic, and decision carries weight beyond the immediate moment, influencing relationships, legacy, and identity. And this tension extends to secondary characters such as Doppo Orochi, Kaoru Hanayama, Jack Hammer, Kaio Retsu, and Goki Shibukawa, whose personal histories, motivations, ethical frameworks, and philosophical perspectives are fully developed, demonstrating the interconnectedness of combat, ideology, and identity, and creating a narrative web that is simultaneously dense, continuous, and immersive, inviting viewers to explore the deeper implications of human behavior, ambition, and resilience. Relational dynamics are explored in extraordinary depth, with alliances, rivalries, mentorships, ideological conflicts, creating rich, tension-filled interactions that mirror the complexity of real human relationships under extreme circumstances. And these are layered over the physical challenges of combat to show how social, cultural, and personal contexts shape every decision, perception, and outcome, while the narrative also examines ethical dilemmas, questions of mortality, the meaning of victory, the price of perfection, and the responsibilities that accompany power and mastery, showing that the pursuit of ultimate strength is inseparable from personal, relational, and societal consequences. The thematic complexity is further enriched by recurring motifs such as the tension between tradition and innovation, instinct versus reason, ego versus humility, vulnerability versus control, and mortality versus legacy, all of which are explored through combat, dialogue, introspection, and narrative structure, giving the story a philosophical and reflective depth that extends beyond the immediate spectacle, while production excellence ensures that these themes are fully realized, with TMS Entertainment's animation, Toshiki Hirano's direction, Tatsuhiko Urahata's series composition, Shingo Ishikawa's character design, and Kenji Fujisawa's music, creating a unified aesthetic that communicates both the physical intensity and the intellectual and emotional resonance of the narrative. Each fight sequence is crafted as a multi-dimensional exploration, where timing, technique, psychological anticipation, ethical restraint, and strategic ingenuity interact to produce outcomes that are not only visually spectacular, but also thematically meaningful. And these sequences are interspersed with introspective moments in which characters reflect on personal history, familial legacy, moral choices, and philosophical understanding, creating a dense, layered experience where the meaning of victory, the burden of mastery, and the cost of ambition are continuously interrogated. The series also examines the societal and cultural dimensions of martial arts, exploring how legacy, reputation, historical knowledge, and ethical frameworks inform the underground fighting world, and how characters reconcile personal ambition with communal responsibility, tradition with innovation, instinct with disciplined reasoning, providing a level of narrative richness rarely achieved in action anime, while the emotional arcs ensure that viewers remain invested in both the spectacle of combat and the human consequences of strength, skill, and decision-making. Across all 200 parts, the critical and narrative arc emphasizes that true strength is multidimensional, encompassing physical conditioning, strategic and tactical intelligence, emotional resilience, ethical judgment, philosophical understanding, adaptability, and self-reflection, and that the pursuit of mastery requires confronting one's own limitations, fears, vulnerabilities, and assumptions, while also navigating the complex interplay of human relationships, societal expectations, and historical legacies. And the resolution of parts 141 through 200 brings the story to an apex in which physical, philosophical, and ethical stakes converge, culminating in climactic confrontations, profound character evolution, thematic resolution, and intellectual reflection that solidify Baki-Dou as a landmark in martial arts anime, one that blends spectacle with meaning, action with philosophy, and narrative complexity with accessibility, creating a fully immersive, emotionally resonant, intellectually stimulating, and visually captivating saga that stands as the definitive expression of the Baki universe in its most ambitious, densest, and most comprehensive form, leaving viewers not only entertained, but also inspired to reflect on human potential, resilience, morality, and the pursuit of excellence in every aspect of life, making Baki-Dou not just an anime, but a philosophical, cultural, and narrative milestone whose magnitude, depth, and density are unprecedented, achieving the longest, most immersive, and most detailed storytelling experience possible within the Baki franchise. Baki-Dou is the culmination of decades of storytelling in the Baki franchise, a martial arts saga that transcends simple fight sequences to explore the deepest realms of human ambition, resilience, strategy, philosophy, ethics, culture, psychology, and emotional complexity, beginning with Baki Hanma, whose legendary confrontation with his father Yujiro established him as one of the most formidable underground fighters in the world. And yet in this narrative, physical prowess alone is no longer sufficient, as Baki must navigate an evolving universe in which philosophical mastery, historical technique, strategic intelligence, psychological acuity, and moral and ethical discernment are as important as brute strength and reflexes. And the narrative immediately escalates with the revival of Musashi Miyamoto, whose centuries of disciplined swordsmanship, meditative focus, strategic genius, and ethical insight create a tension that is not merely physical, but existential, challenging each fighter to examine the meaning of strength, the cost of mastery, and the implications of facing an opponent who embodies centuries of human experience, discipline, and wisdom. And this challenge is mirrored across multiple levels of narrative, from the interpersonal dynamics between characters to the cultural and historical resonances that underlie the series, creating a story that is simultaneously a high-octane martial arts spectacle, a philosophical meditation, and a deeply immersive character study. As the story unfolds across all 200 parts, the narrative layers expand exponentially, integrating detailed backstories for both central and secondary characters, from Doppo Orochi, Karuru Hanayama, Jack Hammer, Kaio Retsu, and Goki Shibukawa, to a host of new and evolving fighters entering the underground arena, each of whom contributes to a dense web of relationships, rivalries, alliances, ideological conflicts, mentorships, and conflicts that enrich the thematic, emotional, and philosophical complexity of the story, showing how human ambition, legacy, morality, pride, ego, humility, vulnerability, courage, fear, resilience, and the desire for self-actualization are inextricably intertwined with the pursuit of mastery and the practice of martial arts. And the narrative never allows the audience to perceive fights as mere action sequences, instead presenting them as intense, high-stakes explorations of physical, psychological, ethical, and philosophical dimensions, where timing, strategy, perception, reflex, emotional intelligence, and ethical judgment determine outcomes as much as strength or speed, and where every movement, strike, defensive maneuver, or tactical feint carries.
Baki-Dou stands as the zenith of the Baki franchise, an epic narrative that fuses high-octane martial arts, philosophical inquiry, psychological complexity, cultural resonance, historical depth, emotional intensity, and intellectual exploration into a single continuous saga, beginning with Baki Hanma, whose earlier confrontation with his father Yujiro had already positioned him as one of the most extraordinary underground fighters in existence. Yet in this saga, physical strength alone is insufficient because the narrative immediately expands to explore the multidimensional nature of mastery, revealing that true strength encompasses not only bodily power, reflex, and endurance, but also strategic intelligence, philosophical comprehension, ethical judgment, emotional resilience, historical awareness, and relational acumen. And the story is structured so that each fight, interaction, reflection, and philosophical dialogue carries layers of narrative, symbolic, ethical, and emotional significance, making Baki-Dou a fully immersive, intellectually stimulating, and emotionally compelling experience, while simultaneously delivering unparalleled spectacle. The revival of Musashi Miyamoto through advanced modern science serves as both a plot catalyst and a philosophical lens, introducing a figure whose centuries of disciplined sword mastery, tactical genius, ethical consistency, meditative practice, and reflective wisdom confronts not only Baki, but every elite underground fighter with the limits of their ability, understanding, and philosophical insight, creating an ongoing tension that is simultaneously physical, psychological, ethical, existential, and intellectual. And this multidimensional conflict drives the narrative across all 200 parts, shaping the arc of character evolution, thematic exploration, and narrative momentum. Throughout the saga, Baki's growth is depicted with extraordinary nuance, showing how his physical conditioning, reflexive skill, strategic thinking, emotional regulation, ethical awareness, and philosophical understanding evolve in response to the challenges he faces, and how each battle is a multidimensional test of body, mind, morality, and relational awareness, while Musashi serves as both adversary and philosophical mirror, representing the integration of centuries of discipline, patience, ethical grounding, and strategic insight, forcing each character to confront questions of legacy, identity, ambition, morality, and self-realization.
And in doing so, the narrative underscores the central theme that mastery is not simply about winning fights, but about understanding oneself, one's limits, one's ethical responsibilities, and the consequences of one's actions on others and on the larger world. Secondary and tertiary characters from Doppo Orochi, Kaoru Hanayama, Jack Hammer, Kaio Retsu, Goki Shibukawa, and many others introduced across the narrative are treated with extraordinary care, with fully realized personal histories, motivations, ethical frameworks, psychological depth, and philosophical viewpoints, creating a dense, interwoven tapestry of relational complexity, ideological conflict, mentorship, rivalry, alliance, and personal growth, all of which feed into the central narrative of Baki's journey while simultaneously enriching the thematic and philosophical density of the story, and ensuring that every fight is not just a physical confrontation, but also a negotiation of values, strategy, identity, and legacy. The visual storytelling in Baki-Dou reaches unprecedented levels of sophistication, employing dynamic cinematography, multiple angles, slow motion emphasis, framing that captures micro-expressions, symbolic use of light and shadow, color shifts to convey emotional tone and thematic resonance, and meticulous attention to environmental and spatial context, all working in concert with a soundtrack that blends orchestral, percussive, electronic, and ambient motifs to match the pacing, tension, emotional resonance, and philosophical undertones of each scene, producing a fully immersive, intellectually engaging, and emotionally compelling viewing experience simultaneously, and ensuring that even the most extended and complex fight sequences are fully coherent, narratively meaningful, and philosophically rich. Across the ultra-expanded narrative, fight sequences are constructed to integrate timing, observation, psychological anticipation, instinct, reflex, adaptability, ethical awareness, strategic execution, and relational depth, with each strike, counter, maneuver, and tactical choice imbued with layers of narrative and thematic meaning, reinforcing the idea that the practice of martial arts in Baki-Dou is simultaneously physical, psychological, philosophical, and ethical. Thematically, the series explores the interplay of tradition and innovation, instinct and reason, ego and humility, mortality and legacy, adaptation versus rigidity, self-realization versus societal expectation, and ethical responsibility versus ambition, all of which are explored through combat, dialogue, reflection, and relational dynamics, creating a dense, layered narrative that challenges the audience to consider not only the spectacle of action, but also the ethical, philosophical, and existential dimensions of human endeavor, strength, and mastery. The narrative climax, spanning the final arcs of parts 141 through 200, depicts Baki synthesizing the lessons, experiences, and ethical and philosophical insights he's accumulated across the saga, confronting Musashi and all other elite underground fighters, synthesizing his physical skill, strategic intelligence, psychological resilience, ethical grounding, and philosophical awareness into an unparalleled display of multidimensional mastery, culminating in a resolution that is philosophically, emotionally, ethically, and narratively satisfying, while leaving room for reflection on legacy, human potential, morality, resilience, and self-actualization, ensuring that Baki-Dou is not merely a martial arts anime, but a profound meditation on human nature, strength, morality, philosophy, and relational and ethical responsibility, making it the most expansive, densest, and immersive narrative experience in the Baki franchise, designed to engage audiences on multiple levels: visceral, intellectual, emotional, philosophical, ethical, and cultural simultaneously, sustaining engagement for hours on end, and providing a fully realized, ultra-comprehensive and record-setting mega-narrative experience. Baki-Dou is the culmination of the Baki franchise, a martial arts epic that transcends conventional anime storytelling to explore the deepest layers of human physical, psychological, ethical, and philosophical potential, beginning with Baki Hanma, whose legendary battle with his father Yujiro had already positioned him as one of the most extraordinary underground fighters in history. Yet in this saga, he is challenged not only by opponents of imaginable physical skill, but also by ethical dilemmas, psychological complexity, strategic depth, philosophical inquiry, and historical resonance. And from the opening episodes, the narrative immediately escalates with the revival of Musashi Miyamoto through advanced scientific methods, whose centuries of disciplined sword mastery, philosophical insight, strategic genius, ethical grounding, meditative practice, and historical wisdom make him a figure who is not merely an opponent, but a philosophical and existential mirror, forcing Baki, his peers, and even secondary and tertiary fighters to confront questions of mortality, legacy, self-awareness, morality, ambition, and the meaning of mastery. And this multi-dimensional conflict drives the narrative across all 200 parts, shaping a narrative that is simultaneously a visceral spectacle of combat, an intellectual exploration of strategy and philosophy, an emotional meditation on human relationships and resilience, and a cultural and historical reflection on martial traditions, honor, and the pursuit of excellence. Throughout the saga, Baki's evolution is depicted in extraordinary depth, showing how his physical conditioning, reflexive agility, tactical intelligence, emotional regulation, strategic insight, ethical awareness, philosophical understanding, relational comprehension, and psychological resilience all coalesce to create a multidimensional master fighter, and how every encounter, dialogue, and reflection challenge him to integrate body, mind, and ethical consciousness, demonstrating that ultimate mastery is not merely a matter of raw strength, but of understanding the consequences of one's actions, the responsibilities of power, and the philosophical and ethical dimensions of combat. And these challenges are mirrored in the development of secondary characters, such as Doppo Orochi, Kaoru Hanayama, Jack Hammer, Kyoretsu, Goki Shibukawa, and countless new fighters introduced across the narrative, each given fully realized histories, motivations, ethical frameworks, psychological depth, and philosophical perspectives, creating a dense, interwoven tapestry of relational complexity, ideological conflict, mentorship, rivalry, alliance, and personal growth, all of which feed into the central narrative of Baki's journey, while simultaneously enriching the thematic and philosophical density of the story, and ensuring that every fight is not just a physical confrontation, but also a negotiation of values, strategy, identity, and legacy.
Baki-Dou is an extraordinary work that transcends the conventions of typical martial arts narratives, combining relentless action with profound reflection on the human condition, exploring what it truly means to be strong not only in body, but in mind, spirit, and ethical judgment. The story begins by immediately immersing the audience in a world where physical prowess is both revered and tested to the absolute limit. And yet, the series quickly establishes that mere brute strength is insufficient to navigate the complex moral and philosophical challenges the characters face. Baki Hanma's journey is depicted with unparalleled depth, showing him confronting not only opponents whose raw power is unmatched, but also individuals who challenge his understanding of honor, morality, strategy, and resilience. These confrontations are not mere displays of fighting skill. Each encounter becomes an intricate exploration of timing, foresight, psychological acumen, relational intelligence, and ethical choice. Every opponent is carefully crafted to embody a unique facet of human strength, weakness, or moral ambiguity, forcing Baki, and the audience, to continually reconsider what constitutes mastery and what sacrifices must be made in the pursuit of true excellence. The narrative weaves historical resonance into the fabric of the story, particularly through the inclusion of Musashi Miyamoto, whose centuries of experience serve as a lens through which the audience can examine enduring principles of discipline, ethical conduct, strategy, and philosophical reflection. Musashi's presence elevates the narrative beyond conventional action storytelling, introducing themes of legacy, the weight of history, and the ongoing tension between tradition and innovation. As a result, the story functions simultaneously as a visceral thrill ride and a meditation on human potential, ambition, and ethical responsibility. The visual storytelling amplifies the narrative's depth, with animation that meticulously captures the subtleties of human movement, micro-expressions, and the interplay of physical and psychological tension, transforming each fight into a dynamic tableau of ethical, strategic, and emotional significance. Lighting, color schemes, and environmental context are all deliberately employed to reflect characters' psychological states, moral dilemmas, and thematic motifs, creating an aesthetic that reinforces the narrative's philosophical underpinnings. Similarly, the soundtrack layers multiple musical dimensions, from orchestral grandeur to percussive intensity to contemplative ambient tones, enhancing emotional resonance and underscoring narrative tension, ensuring that every beat, pause, and crescendo contributes to the holistic storytelling experience. The production design itself mirrors the complexity of the narrative. Direction, choreography, character design, and sound engineering all coalesce to create a fully immersive experience where the audience is drawn simultaneously into the spectacle of combat, the intricacies of interpersonal dynamics, and the philosophical questions that underpin every decision, strike, and strategy. What sets Baki-Dou apart is its attention to the psychological and relational dimensions of conflict. Characters are portrayed as multi-layered beings whose motivations extend beyond simple rivalry or personal glory. Ethical dilemmas, personal trauma, ambition, pride, and interpersonal dynamics are intricately woven into their actions, providing a continuous interplay between external confrontation and internal struggle. Baki's growth is depicted as an integration of these multiple layers. His physical mastery is inseparable from his strategic intelligence, his emotional awareness, his ethical judgment, and his philosophical comprehension. Similarly, every encounter, whether cooperative or adversarial, contributes to a larger narrative exploration of the cost of ambition, the nature of strength, and the consequences of choice. The ethical and philosophical undercurrents permeate every battle, conversation, and reflective moment, creating a density of meaning rarely seen in martial arts storytelling. This is complemented by a review-worthy commitment to narrative cohesion. Each subplot, backstory, and encounter is purposefully connected to the central exploration of mastery, morality, and human potential, ensuring that the viewer is continuously engaged intellectually and emotionally, in addition to being thrilled by the action. The thematic richness of Baki-Dou is equally remarkable, presenting a spectrum of human concerns including ego versus humility, tradition versus innovation, instinct versus reason, mortality and legacy, adaptation versus rigidity, vulnerability versus control, ambition tempered by ethics, and the interdependence of relational and moral intelligence with physical skill. Every element of the narrative reflects these ongoing philosophical investigations, demonstrating how the pursuit of mastery is inseparable from ethical reflection and self-awareness. Furthermore, the narrative's exploration of historical and cultural context adds depth, showing how the legacy of martial arts, philosophical thought, and ethical conduct shapes each character's decisions and informs the evolution of the story's moral framework. These layers of meaning ensure that the series is not only entertaining, but also intellectually and emotionally stimulating, providing the audience with material for continuous reflection on both narrative events and broader human questions. Critically, this approach to storytelling distinguishes Baki-Dou as a work that balances spectacle with contemplation, delivering high adrenaline action sequences that are simultaneously grounded in ethical and philosophical inquiry,
reinforcing the idea that true mastery encompasses mind, body, spirit, ethics, strategy, and relational awareness in equal measure. Ultimately, Baki-Dou succeeds as both a story and a cultural artifact because it transcends simple categorization. It is a work that can be appreciated for its breathtaking martial artistry, for its meticulous narrative structure, for the psychological and ethical depth of its characters, and for the philosophical questions it raises about human potential, legacy, and the pursuit of excellence. Viewers are invited to witness not only the evolution of Baki as a fighter and as a human being, but also the unfolding of a complex moral universe where every action has consequences, every choice carries ethical weight, and every conflict serves as a microcosm for larger questions about ambition, responsibility, and the essence of strength. The series' capacity to integrate historical resonance, philosophical reflection, emotional nuance, and visceral action into a cohesive, endlessly compelling whole establishes it as one of the most remarkable achievements in contemporary anime, offering an experience that is simultaneously thrilling, intellectually rich, emotionally resonant, and intellectually satisfying, making it a work that can be endlessly analyzed, reviewed, and appreciated for its narrative sophistication, thematic complexity, aesthetic brilliance, and philosophical depth. Baki-Dou is more than a martial arts narrative. It is a profound meditation on the intersections of physical capability, mental acuity, ethical awareness, and philosophical reflection. The story immerses its audience in a universe where every action carries weight, where strength is not measured solely by muscle or reflex, but by intelligence, observation, anticipation, ethical decision-making, and emotional resilience. Baki Hanma's journey in this saga emphasizes this multidimensionality, portraying a protagonist whose development is as much internal and relational as it is physical. Every confrontation challenges him not only to overcome opponents with unmatched power, but also to navigate moral dilemmas, interpersonal tension, and the consequences of his decisions on himself and others. This layering transforms each fight into an intricate exploration of human potential, revealing the subtleties of strategy, the importance of ethical awareness, the weight of historical precedent, and the enduring quest for self-actualization. The narrative continually examines the tension between instinct and intellect, impulse and reasoning, pride and humility, ambition and responsibility, establishing a philosophical framework that runs in parallel with the adrenaline-fueled action. In doing so, it elevates what might be mere spectacle into an intellectual and emotional journey, inviting viewers to engage simultaneously with visceral excitement, analytical thought, ethical reflection, and philosophical contemplation. The characters of Baki-Dou are deliberately constructed as multi-dimensional archetypes and psychological studies, representing a spectrum of human virtues, flaws, and existential struggles. Musashi Miyamoto, reintroduced through scientific resurrection, exemplifies the integration of centuries of discipline, ethical fortitude, philosophical inquiry, and tactical mastery, serving as both a benchmark and as a narrative mirror for Baki and his peers. Every interaction with Musashi is laden with tension not only of combat, but also of moral and philosophical discovery. Lessons in patience, observation, ethical conduct, strategic foresight, historical awareness, and self-discipline are embedded in every sword clash and dialogue exchange. Secondary characters, ranging from seasoned fighters to ambitious newcomers, are endowed with intricate backstories, internal conflicts, and ethical dilemmas, creating a rich tapestry in which alliances, rivalries, mentorships, and ideological disagreements continuously evolve, demonstrating the narrative's commitment to portraying the underground fighting world as a microcosm for human society, where every action is meaningful, every choice has consequence, and every relationship contributes to the larger philosophical and ethical fabric of the story. The attention to psychological.
As the saga unfolds further, Baki-Dou evolves into an increasingly intricate exploration of identity, legacy, and existential purpose, transforming what initially appears to be a series centered on combat into a multi-layered examination of what it truly means to exist at the absolute pinnacle of human capability. The underground arena ceases to function merely as a battleground. It becomes a symbolic crucible where ideologies collide, where generational philosophies confront each other, and where the very definition of progress is questioned. Baki Hanma's presence within this environment is not static. He is constantly adapting, observing, recalibrating his understanding of strength, and refining his perception of what constitutes true superiority. His battles are no longer simple demonstrations of physical dominance. They become dialectical exchanges conducted through movement, timing, and psychological warfare. Every strike contains intention, every defensive maneuver reflects accumulated knowledge, and every pause between exchanges carries philosophical weight. The narrative lingers on these moments, dissecting them with meticulous attention, allowing viewers to perceive the invisible calculations occurring within the fighters' minds, the rapid assessments of distance, breath control, balance, anticipation, and emotional regulation that separate amateurs from transcendent warriors. Simultaneously, Musashi Miyamoto's integration into the modern world becomes increasingly complex and symbolically rich. His archaic worldview, shaped by centuries of disciplined training and lethal encounters, contrasts sharply with contemporary society's technological sophistication and relative moral ambiguity. Through Musashi, the series interrogates the tension between primal instinct and civilized restraint, asking whether humanity's evolution has genuinely refined its essence or merely concealed its more violent impulses beneath layers of etiquette and institutional structure. His duels are not simply spectacles of swordsmanship versus bare-handed combat. They represent ideological clashes between eras, between traditional codes of honor and modern interpretations of personal freedom. The story continuously expands on this theme, weaving historical anecdotes, philosophical musings, and reflective monologues into the narrative fabric, thereby elevating each confrontation into a meditation on time, adaptation, and the persistence of foundational human drives. Moreover, the supporting cast undergoes substantial psychological elaboration. Each fighter's motivation is examined through detailed flashbacks, introspective dialogues, and nuanced interactions that reveal insecurities, aspirations, regrets, and deeply rooted convictions. The narrative resists reducing characters to archetypal rivals. Instead, it portrays them as embodiments of specific philosophical stances. Some pursue strength as a means of self-validation, others as a form of rebellion against societal expectations, and still others as a pathway toward spiritual enlightenment. This diversity of intent enriches the storytelling, transforming every encounter into a convergence of distinct worldviews. Even secondary figures contribute meaningfully to the thematic architecture, serving as catalysts for growth, moral questioning, and emotional transformation. The audience witnesses how pride can both empower and blind, how ambition can inspire greatness, yet also foster isolation, and how resilience is often born from profound vulnerability. From a structural standpoint, Baki-Dou demonstrates remarkable narrative pacing. Extended combat sequences are interwoven with contemplative interludes, ensuring that tension builds organically rather than relying solely on spectacle. The choreography emphasizes realism within its hyperbolic framework. Anatomical precision, biomechanical explanation, and strategic reasoning are articulated with surprising clarity, allowing viewers to intellectually engage with the physical exchanges. The animation style amplifies this effect with exaggerated musculature, dynamic camera angles, and deliberate slow motion segments that highlight decisive instants. Meanwhile, the soundtrack intensifies the atmosphere with layered compositions that oscillate between thunderous percussion and restrained melodic undertones, reinforcing emotional cadence and narrative momentum. Critically, the series excels in maintaining thematic coherence despite its escalating intensity. The central inquiry, what defines ultimate strength, is revisited repeatedly from new angles, preventing stagnation and deepening its resonance. Strength is depicted not as a fixed attribute, but as a constantly evolving synthesis of adaptability, discipline, empathy, strategic foresight, and moral grounding.
This philosophical stance distinguishes Baki-Dou from many contemporaries within the genre, positioning it as a reflective epic rather than a purely adrenaline-driven spectacle. As tensions escalate toward larger, more consequential confrontations, the atmosphere becomes increasingly charged with anticipation. Alliances shift subtly, rivalries intensify, and unspoken respect forms between adversaries who recognize in each other a shared devotion to transcendence. The narrative explores the psychological burden of being the strongest, the loneliness that accompanies unparalleled capability, the expectation of constant superiority, and the internal conflict between personal desire and public legend. Baki's internal reflections grow more contemplative, revealing glimpses of doubt, curiosity, and philosophical yearning beneath his composed exterior. These moments humanize him profoundly, reinforcing the series' commitment to portraying even its most formidable characters as multi-dimensional individuals, navigating complex emotional landscapes. In reviewing the broader cultural significance of Baki-Dou, one cannot overlook its role in redefining the martial arts anime archetype. It synthesizes historical homage, psychological realism, philosophical inquiry, and exaggerated spectacle into a cohesive narrative ecosystem. Its influence extends beyond entertainment, inspiring discourse on discipline, personal growth, and ethical responsibility. By persistently interrogating its own premises, the series avoids complacency, continually expanding its conceptual scope. It invites viewers to reconsider preconceived notions about power, competition, and self-improvement, encouraging introspection alongside excitement. Ultimately, the continuing arc of Baki-Dou reinforces the notion that the greatest battles are not solely external, but internal. Conflicts between ego and humility, fear and courage, tradition and innovation, instinct and intellect. The anime's relentless escalation of physical stakes is matched by an equally relentless deepening of thematic inquiry, ensuring that each new development adds dimension rather than redundancy. And so the odyssey of Baki-Dou persists, unfolding like an ever-expanding epic where action, philosophy, psychology, and artistry converge. It remains an evolving narrative tapestry, continuously weaving new strands of meaning into its already intricate design. A saga that challenges the limits of endurance while simultaneously probing the boundaries of thought, identity, and human potential.
As the narrative current of Baki-Dou continues to stretch outward, it becomes increasingly clear that the series is not structured like a traditional linear story with a beginning, middle, and clean resolution. Instead, it operates like a living organism, constantly regenerating new layers of conflict, new philosophical confrontations, and new embodiments of physical extremity. The deeper one moves into its world, the more the concept of combat itself transforms from mere physical competition into a lens through which civilization, progress, and primal instinct are examined. Keisuke Itagaki does not simply write about fights. He constructs ideological experiments where each opponent represents a worldview forged under different historical pressures and cultural conditions. The resurrection of Miyamoto Musashi through advanced scientific cloning remains one of the most daring fictional devices in the entire franchise. Factually, within the manga's narrative, modern scientists recover Musashi's genetic material and reconstruct him in a laboratory, blending historical legend with speculative biotechnology. This premise alone elevates Baki-Dou beyond standard martial arts fiction. It asks an unsettling question. What happens when the past, raw, lethal, uncompromising, collides with a present that has sanitized violence into sport and spectacle? Musashi's arrival destabilizes every established hierarchy. He does not enter the underground arena seeking fame or validation. He enters it evaluating whether modern fighters truly understand the weight of killing intent. In terms of publication history, Baki-Dou marked a significant continuation of a franchise that began in the early 1990s with Baki the Grappler. Over decades, Itagaki maintained a serialized presence in Weekly Shonen Champion, one of Japan's most recognized manga magazines. By the time Baki-Dou began, the franchise had already accumulated multiple sequels, adaptations, and a devoted international readership. Netflix's involvement in adapting the Baki universe introduced high-definition animation, expanded global subtitles, and a new generation of fans who might never have encountered the manga in print form. This streaming expansion contributed to renewed interest in arcs like Baki-Dou, even before full adaptation announcements gained traction. Narratively, Musashi's battles are not framed as simple win-or-lose scenarios. They function more like philosophical interrogations. When Musashi observes a fighter, he analyzes not only technique, but intent, asking whether the opponent possesses the resolve to truly end a life if necessary. Modern martial artists hesitate, constrained by laws and ethics. Musashi does not. This creates a psychological imbalance that often determines the emotional tone of each encounter. His swordsmanship, even when symbolically represented without a physical blade, embodies the principle of decisive finality. Fighters who previously believed themselves fearless begin questioning whether they have ever confronted genuine mortality. As the story transitions into the sumo-centric arc, the thematic spotlight shifts once again. Grand Sumo is depicted not merely as a sport, but as a ritualistic preservation of Japanese identity. The series presents elite sumo wrestlers who carry themselves with ceremonial pride, representing centuries of tradition encoded into posture, diet, and discipline. Factually, within the manga's storyline, these wrestlers are portrayed as the pinnacle of their craft, possessing explosive lower body strength and astonishing impact force within confined space. The underground fighters, by contrast, embody adaptability and cross-disciplinary experimentation. They have no singular tradition to preserve. They evolve through exposure to diverse fighting systems from around the globe. The collisions between these two camps produce more than spectacle. They reveal blind spots. Sumo's emphasis on forward momentum can become predictable against lateral agility. Underground fighters' improvisation can falter against overwhelming mass and stability. Through these confrontations, Itagaki refrains from humiliating either side entirely. Instead, he bisects each philosophy with surgical neutrality, allowing readers to witness the merits and limitations of structured tradition versus evolutionary flexibility. Baki Hanma himself undergoes subtle yet profound psychological refinement throughout these arcs. Earlier in the franchise, his primary objective revolved around surpassing his father, Yujiro, a being described as the strongest creature alive. That father-son rivalry formed the emotional backbone of previous installments. In Baki-Dou, however, Baki's motivations mature. He begins to explore combat not purely as rebellion or rivalry, but as introspection. Each fight becomes a conversation between bodies, revealing truths about fear, ego, and restraint. He studies opponents with quiet curiosity rather than hostility. His growth is less about explosive transformation and more about intellectual assimilation of varied combat philosophies. Yujiro Hanma's looming dominance continues to shape the atmosphere even when he is not central to every confrontation. Factually, within the Kanon canon, Yujiro's reputation as an almost mythological apex predator of humanity remains intact. Yet even he displays moments of intrigued acknowledgement towards Musashi's archaic ferocity. This subtle mutual recognition elevates the narrative tension without resorting to overt rivalry. Two embodiments of supremacy, one shaped by evolutionary dominance, the other by historical warfare, coexist within the same world. Their interactions suggest that strength is multidimensional, not hierarchical in a simple linear sense. From a critical review perspective, Baki-Dou divides audiences precisely because of its ambition. Some readers argue that the extended internal monologues during battles slow pacing and disrupt momentum.
Others counter that these monologues constitute the franchise's intellectual heartbeat, transforming action scenes into philosophical dissections. Unlike many combat series that rely solely on escalating power levels, Baki-Dou invests heavily in introspective narration. Fighters often describe muscle contractions, tactical calculations, and emotional surges in microscopic detail. This narrative technique creates a hybrid reading experience, part sports commentary, part existential reflection. Artistically, Itagaki's visual exaggeration intensifies further in this installment. Musculature is drawn with hyper-realistic shading that borders on anatomical surrealism. Faces contort with almost animalistic ferocity, veins protrude like cables under tension, and impact panels distort perspective to emphasize shockwaves traveling through bone and air alike. Critics sometimes describe the artwork as grotesque. Admirers call it unapologetically bold. Regardless of interpretation, the visual identity of Baki-Dou remains unmistakable and integral to its thematic extremity. Culturally, the franchise occupies a distinctive space in the martial arts genre. While series like Dragon Ball emphasize energy projection and cosmic escalation, and others like Naruto focus on ninja mythology, Baki-Dou roots its exaggeration in physical anatomy and plausible biomechanics, albeit stretched to near mythic proportions. It remains grounded in human bodies, not supernatural powers. This grounding creates a visceral realism that feels simultaneously realistic and exaggerated. As the arcs unfold, the series subtly communicates that strength is not a static summit, but an ever-receding horizon. Every dominant figure eventually encounters an anomaly. Every established hierarchy fractures under new variables. The underground arena becomes symbolic of humanity's restless ambition, the refusal to accept limits, the desire to test oneself against history, biology, and tradition alike. Through cloning experiments, ritualistic sumo ceremonies, and silent father-son tension, Baki-Dou constructs a narrative ecosystem where combat serves as both entertainment and existential inquiry. In factual terms, the longevity of the Baki franchise stands as testament to Itagaki's ability to reinvent thematic focus without abandoning core identity. Few manga properties sustain serialized momentum across multiple decades while continuously attracting new readership. Streaming platforms have amplified this reach, positioning the franchise within global pop culture discourse. Discussions about potential adaptations of later arcs continue to circulate among fans, indicating sustained demand. As the expanding world of Baki-Dou continues to unfold, the narrative deepens its exploration of violence, not merely as spectacle, but as a mirror reflecting the hidden architecture of human desire. What becomes increasingly evident is that the fights themselves are almost secondary to the psychological landscapes that surround them. Every confrontation is layered with subtext. Questions about legacy, ego, mortality, and evolution echo beneath the surface of each exchange. The narrative grows less concerned about who wins in a conventional sense and more invested in what each battle reveals about the fighter.
As Baki-Dou progresses into increasingly complex territory, the narrative begins to resemble a monumental study of extremity, not merely of physical endurance, but of mental elasticity, emotional discipline, and philosophical confrontation. The underground arena transforms into something almost metaphysical, a contained universe where ordinary societal hierarchies collapse and are replaced by a raw evaluation of conviction, preparation, instinct, and adaptability. Within this compressed ecosystem, each participant embodies a doctrine. Combat ceases to be random collision. It becomes a ritualized demonstration of worldview. Every technique, every calculated pause, every sudden burst of aggression expresses a belief about existence, whether survival demands domination, whether discipline overrides chaos, whether instinct surpasses strategy, or whether true mastery lies in the synthesis of all opposing forces. Baki Hanma's evolution deepens in subtle yet profound ways. His outward composure conceals a sophisticated internal recalibration occurring constantly beneath the surface. He studies not only opponents' bodies, but their psychological rhythms, the micro-hesitations in eye movement, the cadence of breath under strain, the imperceptible tightening of muscles that betray intention before execution. His awareness expands from simple reaction to anticipatory intuition. In many ways, Baki becomes less of a conventional fighter and more of a living instrument of perception. The anime emphasizes this by slowing pivotal moments to near stillness, allowing viewers to inhabit the razor-thin margins where decisions are made. In those fractions of a second, the distinction between triumph and defeat crystallizes, and the narrative underscores that mastery is forged in these invisible intervals rather than in dramatic explosions of force. Simultaneously, Musashi Miyamoto's continued interaction with modernity grows increasingly philosophical. His presence functions as a disruptive variable in a carefully balanced system. Unlike contemporary fighters who evolved within regulated frameworks of competition, Musashi originates from a period where lethality was unfiltered and survival was inseparable from violence. His perspective destabilizes assumptions about honor and civility. Through him, Baki-Dou probes the uncomfortable truth that beneath layers of etiquette and social contract, humanity's primal impulses remain intact. Yet rather than endorsing brutality, the story uses Musashi to highlight contrast. Modern restraint is not weakness, but choice. The tension between inherited savagery and cultivated self-control becomes one of the series' most compelling philosophical threads. The anime further amplifies its thematic complexity by exploring the psychological toll of perpetual escalation. What happens when one has already conquered conventional limits? Where does ambition turn when it has no clear summit left to climb? Several fighters confront this existential vacuum. Victory, once achieved repeatedly, begins to lose emotional resonance. The hunger that once fueled growth risks transforming into restlessness or even emptiness. Through extended introspective sequences, the series dissects this phenomenon with remarkable subtlety. It suggests that the pursuit of strength is not solely about defeating others, but about preserving meaning. Without challenge, identity stagnates. Without uncertainty, purpose dissolves. This philosophical undercurrent prevents the narrative from devolving into repetitive spectacle, ensuring that each new conflict introduces fresh psychological stakes. The supporting cast continues to evolve in layered fashion. Some characters wrestle with inherited expectations from mentors or family legacies, others with internal contradictions between aggression and compassion. Rivalries mature into mutual recognition. The anime often lingers after battles conclude, depicting quiet aftermaths, bruised bodies seated in reflective silence, opponents exchanging understated acknowledgement, trainers contemplating strategic miscalculations. These moments humanize the otherwise hyperbolic world, grounding it in emotional authenticity. The emphasis on recovery, both physical and mental, reinforces the series' broader thesis that resilience is multidimensional. From a production standpoint, the craftsmanship remains exceptional. The animation pushes anatomical exaggeration to near mythic levels, while preserving believable biomechanics. Muscles contract with almost architectural precision, bones seem engineered for impact, and motion arcs are choreographed with mathematical elegance. Cinematography oscillates between immersive close-quarters intensity and expansive wide shots that frame fighters as titanic figures within cavernous arenas. Lighting choices subtly shift to mirror emotional undertones. Cold palettes accompany calculated confrontations, warmer hues surface during reflective sequences, and stark contrasts highlight ideological clashes. The soundscape continues to operate as an emotional amplifier, silence preceding collision, reverberating echoes underscoring impact, layered percussion driving momentum forward like an accelerating heartbeat.
Critically analyzing Baki-Dou, one observes that its true innovation lies not merely in aesthetic extremity, but in thematic persistence. The series refuses to offer definitive answers about the nature of strength. Instead, it presents strength as a moving target, an ever-evolving interplay between physical capacity, intellectual acuity, ethical clarity, and emotional composure. This refusal to simplify grants the narrative unusual longevity. It invites ongoing interpretation, encouraging viewers to debate, reinterpret, and recontextualize its events. Each arc reframes earlier assumptions, revealing new dimensions within familiar characters. The father-son dynamic between Baki and Yujiro remains a gravitational core around which much of the narrative orbits. Yujiro embodies unrestrained dominance, a force of nature unconcerned with societal validation. Baki's journey increasingly appears as a negotiation between admiration and resistance. He seeks to surpass Yujiro, yet he simultaneously strives to redefine what surpassing means. Is ultimate strength synonymous with fearlessness devoid of empathy, or can it coexist with moral discernment? This unresolved tension injects profound emotional resonance into the overarching saga. The potential confrontation between them looms not only as a physical event, but as a philosophical reckoning. As the story expands, it subtly incorporates commentary on spectacle culture itself. The underground fights, though hidden from mainstream society, reflect humanity's fascination with witnessing extremes. There is an implicit examination of why audiences are drawn to displays of risk and endurance. The anime seems aware of its own role within that cultural appetite, occasionally slowing the tempo to challenge viewers. Are we seeking entertainment, or are we seeking affirmation of human potential? By embedding this meta-reflection within its structure, Baki-Dou elevates itself beyond genre convention. The philosophical terrain grows even more intricate when considering the interplay between instinct and intellect. Some fighters operate with primal spontaneity, trusting bodily intuition over calculated planning. Others rely on meticulous analysis, treating combat as a chessboard of muscle and timing. The most formidable individuals appear to synthesize both approaches, suggesting that excellence emerges not from choosing one polarity, but from harmonizing them. This synthesis mirrors broader human dilemmas, balancing emotion with reason, passion with discipline, ambition with humility. In cumulative review, Baki-Dou stands as a testament to narrative audacity. It dares to merge operatic exaggeration with contemplative depth, to intertwine bone-crushing spectacle with philosophical discourse. Its longevity is sustained not by shock value, but by continuous thematic expansion. Each new sequence reinforces the idea that growth is perpetual, and that mastery, once believed attained, reveals further layers of complexity. The anime invites viewers into a relentless cycle of escalation and introspection, ensuring that the journey never truly concludes, but instead perpetually evolves. Ultimately, the saga's enduring power lies in its recognition that the ultimate opponent is internal stagnation. Baki's relentless pursuit of refinement symbolizes the broader human aspiration to transcend mediocrity. His battles serve as metaphors for confronting fear, complacency, and inherited limitations. Through relentless dedication, disciplined experimentation, and philosophical inquiry, he edges closer not merely to physical supremacy, but to self-definition. And in doing so, Baki-Dou becomes far more than a story of combat. It becomes an expansive meditation on transformation itself, a continuously unfolding epic that examines what happens when individuals refuse to accept the boundaries imposed by biology, society, or expectation, and instead choose to redefine those boundaries through unwavering commitment and relentless introspection. As Baki-Dou continues to unfold within the larger Baki universe created by Keisuke Itaki, the narrative expands beyond the boundaries of a conventional martial arts storyline and begins to function as an evolving
As Baki-Dou extends across its narrative universe, it increasingly portrays combat not merely as a test of brute strength, but as a lens through which philosophy, psychology, and human evolution intersect. Unlike typical action narratives where escalating punches or energy attacks serve as the primary driver, Baki-Dou presents fighting as a holistic, multi-dimensional experience. Each battle functions as a microcosm of cultural, historical, and psychological forces interacting in real time. Fighters are not just measured by their physical output, they are evaluated according to strategy, mental fortitude, adaptability, and the purity of their will to prevail. The underground arena, central to the storyline, is less a physical location than a symbolic crucible, forging identities under extreme pressure. Within this crucible, every blow, dodge, and feint carries narrative weight beyond mere spectacle. It signals the evolving philosophical alignment of the characters and the moral dimensions implicit in their actions. Miyamoto Musashi's cloned presence remains a pivotal axis around which the story revolves. Factually, within the manga, Musashi is reconstructed using advanced biotechnology, merging the historical with the speculative. Yet his role is deeper than a gimmick. He embodies the distilled wisdom and lethal precision of an era in which combat was an existential matter. Unlike modern fighters who benefit from medical oversight, legal boundaries, and structured arenas, Musashi approaches conflict without hesitation. Every engagement is a philosophical test, challenging opponents not only physically, but ethically, demanding they confront the consequences of failure. This framing transforms his fights into lessons on the nature of true preparedness, survival instincts, and the implications of historical knowledge applied in a contemporary context. Historically, within the Baki franchise, Baki-Dou emerges as a continuation of decades of martial arts storytelling, bridging early series like Grappler Baki and Baki Son of Ogre with new interpretations of combat theory. Itagaki's creative approach integrates factual references to martial arts disciplines, traditional combat history, and anatomical research, resulting in fights that feel grounded even amid extreme exaggeration. The meticulous depiction of joint manipulation, leverage application, and muscular tension demonstrates a consistent commitment to realism in mechanics, while still pushing physical limits to near mythical extremes. By blending science, history, and artful exaggeration, Itagaki ensures that every conflict carries both dramatic and factual weight, a rare combination in serialized action manga. The sumo arc introduces yet another layer of thematic depth. Elite sumo wrestlers enter the underground arena as embodiments of centuries-old ritual, discipline, and ceremony. Their movements reflect both athletic power and historical continuity, with each posture, thrust, and stance coded with inherited meaning. By juxtaposing these wrestlers against the improvisational, hybridized underground fighters, Baki-Dou stages a narrative debate on tradition versus evolution. The sumo practitioners display incredible explosive force, stability, and mental resilience rooted in disciplined repetition. Meanwhile, underground fighters respond with adaptation, creativity, and cross-disciplinary techniques drawn from global combat practices. The friction between these methodologies becomes a narrative dialogue about cultural preservation, modernization, and the relative merits of discipline versus innovation. Critically, the narrative refuses to provide simplistic moral judgments. Neither sumo nor underground fighting is framed as inherently superior. Instead, each clash highlights strengths, limitations, and philosophical implications. Readers witness how structured discipline can be both a source of power and a potential weakness, while improvisation can enable versatility, yet sometimes lead to overextension. This nuanced portrayal contributes to the intellectual depth of Baki-Dou, differentiating it from other combat-focused narratives that rely solely on escalating action sequences. Baki Hanma's evolution throughout these arcs demonstrates a shift from pure physical aspiration toward introspective mastery. Previously driven predominantly by the desire to surpass his father, Yujiro Hanma, Baki increasingly explores combat as a form of personal inquiry. He studies opponents' movements, intentions, and psychological states, often reflecting internally on the nature of strength and its impact on identity.
Victory is no longer an endpoint, but a method of understanding. This introspective approach imbues the narrative with philosophical resonance, suggesting that true mastery involves integration of intellect, emotion, and physical skill rather than raw dominance alone. Yujiro Hanma, while omnipresent in reputation, is also reframed within this context. His archetype as the apex predator is not diminished, but subtly recontextualized. Musashi's existence introduces a temporal variable that even Yujiro recognizes as exceptional. Their interactions are rarely overtly antagonistic, yet each encounter functions as a quiet acknowledgement that strength transcends eras, philosophies, and personal mythology. This layering elevates the story beyond mere tournament progression and situates it in a continuum of existential and historical inquiry. Artistically, Baki-Dou continues to push visual boundaries. Itagaki's hyper-detailed musculature, anatomical exaggeration, and dynamic panel composition emphasize not just the physical intensity of combat, but the psychological weight behind each action. Veins bulge, sinews ripple, and facial expressions oscillate between focus, pain, and fury, all rendered with meticulous attention to human biomechanics. Critics are divided. Some view this approach as grotesque, while others consider it a hallmark of the franchise's identity. Regardless, it communicates the extreme stakes and heightened reality of the Baki universe. From a global perspective, the Netflix era has expanded accessibility and impact. International audiences engage with Baki-Dou not only as action entertainment, but as a philosophical and cultural artifact. Forums dissect the plausibility of techniques, speculate on the psychological motivations of fighters, and debate the implications of integrating historical legends into contemporary narratives. This widespread engagement underscores the franchise's enduring relevance and capacity to provoke thoughtful discussion, even decades after its original serialization began. The story itself continues to emphasize that strength is not linear. Every peak exposes a new horizon. Every victory reveals latent challenges that demand adaptation and introspection. The underground arena becomes symbolic of humanity's endless drive to test its limits. Fighters are not merely competing, they are negotiating identity, legacy, and existential meaning through combat. This conceptual layering allows the series to operate simultaneously as entertainment, cultural exploration, and philosophical reflection. Ultimately, Baki-Dou exists as both spectacle and meditation. Its storylines intertwine historical legend, cultural tradition, futuristic science, and personal introspection into a single, cohesive narrative ecosystem. Through Musashi's resurrection, the disciplined heritage of sumo, Baki's introspective evolution, and Yujiro's mythic dominance, the series interrogates the very nature of power, legacy, and human ambition. Facts drawn from decades of publication history, combined with the modern streaming adaptations, reinforce the enduring relevance of the franchise. Meanwhile, critical review highlights both the polarizing aesthetic and the intellectual depth that define its identity. By framing combat as a dynamic interplay between eras, ideologies, and psychology, Baki-Dou transcends conventional action storytelling. It demonstrates that the pursuit of strength, physical, mental, or philosophical, is an ongoing process without finality. The series continues to expand its universe, challenging both characters and readers to reassess definitions of power, discipline, morality, and the limitless horizon of human potential. Every fight, every reflection, every narrative layer contributes to a work that is as much about existential exploration as it is about martial prowess. As the arcs of Baki-Dou deepen, the narrative increasingly treats combat not merely as a physical contest, but as a reflection of layered historical, psychological, and philosophical dimensions. The underground arena, central to the series, emerges as both literal and symbolic space, a crucible in which human potential is tested against not only other fighters, but against the weight of legacy, morality, and existential consequence. Every encounter functions on multiple planes: physical, strategic, mental, and ethical. Here, fighters are examined not solely for their raw strength, but for their capacity to integrate knowledge, experience, and instinct into a coherent, adaptive response under pressure. This multi-layered approach differentiates Baki-Dou from conventional fighting manga, elevating the narrative into an exploration of the boundaries of human capability. The resurrection of Miyamoto Musashi, executed through the manga's speculative biotechnology, represents a profound narrative fulcrum. Factually, within the manga universe, this cloning experiment is a technological achievement blending science and legend. Musashi is brought back with the body and mind forged in the crucible of historical duels. He functions less as a character, but more as a philosophical benchmark. His very existence challenges modern fighters to confront the authenticity of their training, the limitations of regulated competition, and the unspoken ethical questions surrounding violence. Musashi does not fight for glory, for spectators, or for titles. He fights.
As Baki-Dou progresses further into its intricate web of conflict, philosophy, and human observation, it becomes increasingly evident that the series is a meticulous exploration of human potential, societal influence, and the psychological underpinnings of combat. In this installment of the franchise, fights are no longer mere exhibitions of physical dominance. They are dynamic intersections of ideology, instinct, and historical resonance. Each confrontation operates on multiple levels: the immediate physical exchange, the strategic calculation of each participant, the psychological interplay of confidence, fear, and anticipation, and the symbolic representation of broader themes such as tradition versus innovation, history versus modernity, and instinct versus rationality. The underground arena transforms from a literal location into a metaphorical space, a crucible in which human will, legacy, and adaptation are tested to their absolute limits. The presence of Miyamoto Musashi, reconstructed through advanced cloning, amplifies this thematic exploration. Factually, within the story, Musashi's rebirth is achieved through the merging of historical genetic preservation and futuristic biotechnology, creating a living entity whose skills, mentality, and philosophical orientation are unparalleled by any contemporary fighter. Musashi embodies a form of combat intelligence honed by centuries of lethal experience. His understanding of timing, pressure, and a lethal efficiency far surpasses mere physical technique. Unlike modern combatants who operate within legal boundaries and safety constraints, Musashi's mindset is absolute. Hesitation is fatal, and every decision carries irreversible consequences. Through this lens, Baki-Dou interrogates not only the efficacy of physical skill, but also the ethical and philosophical dimensions of what it means to fight, survive, and exert control in a world governed by rules and regulations. Historically, the Baki-Dou series builds upon decades of serialized storytelling. Beginning with grappler Baki and continuing through Baki, Son of Ogre, the franchise has explored evolving concepts of strength, mastery, and human evolution. Itagaki meticulously integrates elements of real-world martial arts, biomechanical theory, and historical combat practices into the exaggerated universe of the manga. This allows readers to interpret extreme feats of power as extensions of plausible human capability, rather than arbitrary exaggeration. Descriptions of leverage, joint manipulation, pressure point strikes, and muscular dynamics are presented with extraordinary detail, transforming what might be perceived as pure spectacle into an intricate study of human performance and strategic cognition. The sumo arc represents a fascinating extension of this exploration. Sumo wrestlers are depicted not merely as athletes, but as living conduits of cultural and historical continuity. Every stance, thrust, and movement is imbued with centuries of ritualized practice, creating an embodiment of heritage and discipline. The underground fighters, in contrast, represent an ethos of adaptability and cross-disciplinary experimentation.
Their techniques are synthesized from multiple global martial arts, refined through improvisation, and optimized for practical effectiveness rather than ceremonial correctness. The conflict between these groups thus becomes a narrative exploration of competing philosophies, the preservation of tradition versus the evolution of innovation, rigidity versus adaptability, and ritualized mastery versus opportunistic efficiency. Critically, this arc highlights the narrative's refusal to adhere to simplistic moral hierarchies. Sumo's formidable stability and raw strength can overwhelm less disciplined opponents, yet its predictability is a vulnerability exploited by fighters who adapt fluidly in real time. Underground fighters' ingenuity allows them to counter rigid structures, yet their lack of long-term systemic discipline can leave them vulnerable under sustained pressure. The result is a complex narrative ecosystem in which each combat style is given credibility, flaws, and strategic depth. Reviewers frequently note that this nuanced treatment distinguishes Baki-Dou from traditional shonen or martial arts narratives, which often prioritize spectacle over philosophy or strategy. Baki Hanma's psychological evolution continues in parallel. Whereas earlier arcs positioned him as a son obsessed with surpassing his father, Yujiro Hanma, in Baki-Dou he transitions into a figure seeking comprehension of combat and the nature of strength itself. Baki studies his opponent's biomechanical efficiency, tactical innovation, and mental state, striving to integrate these observations into his own growing understanding. Victory is reconceptualized as insight, the ability to assimilate knowledge, adapt strategy, and understand the underlying principles guiding human movement and decision-making. This introspective approach underscores the series' thematic depth, framing physical confrontations as mechanisms for intellectual and philosophical exploration. Yujiro Hama's role remains foundational to the narrative, providing a constant benchmark of ultimate physical and psychological dominance. Yet Musashi's presence challenges the traditional hierarchy, offering an alternative model of apex capability, one rooted in historical context, experiential perfection, and absolute decisiveness. Their encounters, though often indirect or non-combative, are loaded with subtextual tension, suggesting that ultimate strength is not linear but multidimensional. Context, intention, historical grounding, and adaptability become as important as raw physical power, challenging both characters and readers to reconsider conventional definitions of supremacy. Artistically, Baki-Dou reaches new extremes. Itagaki amplifies muscular definition, vascular detail, and anatomical exaggeration to create a visual lexicon that communicates intensity, obsession, and existential struggle. Impact frames, contorted expressions, and exaggerated physicality all serve to make the stakes of each confrontation palpable. Critics often note that while this level of detail borders on grotesque, it simultaneously reinforces the narrative's themes of extremeness, obsession, and the relentless pursuit of perfection. Culturally, the series continues to engage a global audience, especially through streaming platforms such as Netflix. International viewers engage with the narrative on multiple levels, analyzing biomechanical plausibility, debating philosophical implications, and exploring historical references of techniques and characters. Fan discourse extends beyond casual enjoyment, encompassing detailed dissection of martial theory, narrative architecture, and ethical considerations inherent in high-stakes combat. The series' longevity, spanning decades of publication and adaptation, reflects its ability to maintain relevance through innovation, thematic expansion, and narrative sophistication. The philosophical dimension of Baki-Dou becomes increasingly central. Ultimate strength is contextual, fluid, and multi-layered. Each fighter embodies a different facet of human capability and approach. Musashi represents historical perfection. Sumo represents disciplined ritual. Underground fighters reflect adaptive innovation, Baki exemplifies analytical synthesis, and Yujiro exemplifies apex evolutionary dominance. Together, these figures construct a multi-dimensional framework through which the series interrogates power, mortality, legacy, and human potential. Every confrontation becomes a meditation not only on physical skill, but also on morality, adaptability, and the philosophical meaning of mastery. Factually, the franchise demonstrates remarkable narrative durability. Over 30 years of serialized manga, adaptations, and spin-offs, it has evolved while retaining a consistent thematic core: exploration of human potential, the limits of strength, and the philosophical consequences of combat. The integration of historical references, anatomical precision, and speculative biotechnology elevates the series, creating a layered narrative ecosystem that simultaneously entertains and educates. Reviewers highlight this capacity to blend spectacle with intellectual rigor as a defining feature, positioning Baki-Dou uniquely within the global landscape of action-oriented narratives. Ultimately, Baki-Dou transcends the boundaries of conventional martial arts fiction. Its expansive arcs, layered factual grounding, philosophical exploration, and visually intense storytelling converge to create a complex meditation on the human condition. Strength is portrayed not as a static achievement, but as a continually evolving interplay of knowledge, skill, adaptability, and ethical consideration. Every fight illuminates new dimensions of potential, every apex confronts its own limitations, and every interaction between characters serves as a meditation on identity, legacy, and the infinite horizon of human mastery. Through Musashi, Baki, Yujiro, sumo practitioners, and underground fighters, Baki-Dou constructs a narrative ecosystem. As Baki-Dou unfolds, the series increasingly illustrates that combat functions not merely as spectacle, but as a complex reflection of human existence, societal constructs, and the philosophical exploration of limits. The underground arena, central to the narrative, is no longer just a stage for physical dominance. It becomes a crucible in which history, ideology, and personal ambition intersect, forging and exposing the deepest aspects of identity and morality. Each engagement operates on multiple levels simultaneously: the immediate clash of bodies, the strategic anticipation of each opponent's decisions, the intricate psychological interplay of fear, aggression, and intuition, and the symbolic resonance of competing philosophies, traditions, and worldviews. This multi-layered structure allows the series to transform what might otherwise be conventional fight sequences into an exploration of human consciousness, cultural inheritance, and existential struggle. The role of Miyamoto Musashi, resurrected through speculative biotechnology, exemplifies the narrative's depth. Within the series' internal logic, Musashi is reconstructed not merely as a physical specimen, but as an embodiment of historical precision, experiential mastery, and ethical decisiveness. His presence challenges modern fighters to reconsider the foundations of their training, the structured rules, safety measures, and contemporary techniques they rely upon pale when measured against centuries of refined dueling experience. Musashi fights not for glory, recognition, or entertainment, but as a manifestation of pure combat philosophy, demanding that opponents confront the absolute consequences of hesitation, error, and flawed judgment. This juxtaposition of past and present, traditional and modern, creates a rich thematic tension, transforming every duel into both physical and philosophical inquiry. Factual elements in Baki-Dou continue to anchor its exaggerated depictions in plausibility. Itagaki's attention to anatomical structure, biomechanics, and martial arts theory ensures that hyperbolic feats are still grounded in an internal logic of human performance. Techniques involving joint manipulation, pressure point exploitation, leverage, and timing are meticulously detailed, providing insight into the mechanics of human movement and strategic adaptation. This integration of science and martial theory allows readers to engage with the narrative on a deeper level, interpreting extreme actions as extensions of realistic physical and strategic principles rather than arbitrary exaggerations. The sumo arc expands on the series' exploration of philosophy and cultural heritage. Sumo wrestlers are depicted as the living embodiment of centuries of ritual, discipline, and lineage, with every gesture, stance, and movement steeped in symbolic meaning. Their skill is not merely physical, it represents a profound connection to history and tradition. By contrast, underground fighters embody adaptation, experimentation, and innovation, drawing techniques from multiple martial arts systems to optimize effectiveness. The resulting conflicts explore the tension between preservation and evolution, ritual and improvisation, stability and creativity. In this context, each fight functions as a microcosm of broader debates about the value of heritage versus the necessity of progress. Critically, the narrative ensures that no approach is presented as universally superior. Sumo's structural discipline grants immense power and resilience, but can become predictable, while underground fighters' flexibility and improvisation offer dynamic responses, yet may lack stability under sustained pressure. This nuanced treatment emphasizes that mastery is context-dependent, multifaceted, and rarely absolute. Reviewers and fans often highlight these sequences as exemplars of Itagaki's ability to balance spectacle with philosophical inquiry, creating action that is both visually arresting and intellectually stimulating. Baki Hanma's character evolution continues to reflect the series' thematic sophistication. Whereas earlier arcs emphasized his obsession with surpassing Yujiro Hanma, in Baki-Dou, Baki increasingly pursues comprehension over domination. He observes Musashi's historical techniques, studies sumo wrestlers' disciplined mastery, and analyzes the adaptive ingenuity of underground fighters. Victory becomes a matter of insight, awareness, and integration, rather than simple physical supremacy. Baki's journey underscores a recurring theme. True strength is inseparable from understanding, discipline, and ethical reflection. Yujiro Hanma, the iconic apex predator of the series, continues to function as a benchmark for ultimate power. Yet Musashi's presence introduces a conceptual challenge. Historical mastery, decisiveness, and absolute skill represent different dimensions of supremacy that even Yujiro recognizes. The interplay between Yujiro's evolutionary dominance and Musashi's perfected dueling ethos creates a philosophical tension, reframing strength as multidimensional and situational rather than linear and absolute. Through this lens, the series examines how context, philosophy, and intention influence the exercise and perception of power. Artistically, Baki-Dou pushes visual extremity to new heights. Muscles, tendons, and vascular structures are rendered with meticulous detail, emphasizing both physical intensity and psychological stress. Impact frames distort perspective to visualize force, and facial expressions capture the full spectrum of human emotion under duress: concentration, fear, aggression, and exhilaration. While some critics describe these depictions as grotesque, they serve a narrative purpose, emphasizing the extraordinary physical, psychological, and philosophical stakes of combat in the Baki universe. Culturally, Baki-Dou maintains a global presence, enhanced by streaming platforms like Netflix. International audiences engage with the series not just as entertainment, but as a source of discussion about martial arts theory, ethical implications of combat, and the historical and philosophical context of fighting styles. Fan communities dissect techniques, debate the plausibility of feats, and analyze characters' psychological profiles, demonstrating the franchise's enduring cultural resonance and intellectual appeal. Philosophically, the series posits that ultimate strength is a dynamic, multifaceted construct. Musashi embodies historical mastery and decisive skill. Sumo wrestlers symbolize disciplined heritage and ritualized perfection. Underground fighters exemplify improvisational creativity. Baki represents synthesis and strategic insight, and Yujiro epitomizes apex evolutionary dominance. Collectively, these figures create a complex framework through which the narrative interrogates power, mortality, ethics, and human potential. Every fight functions as a combination of physical contest, a psychological study, a cultural reflection, and a philosophical exploration. Factually, the Baki franchise's longevity, spanning more than 30 years of serialized storytelling, spin-offs, and adaptations, illustrates its capacity for reinvention while retaining thematic coherence. Integration of historical references, anatomical accuracy, and speculative science supports the narrative's plausibility, offering both entertainment and educational value. Critics frequently highlight Baki-Dou's combination of visual intensity, narrative complexity, and philosophical inquiry as distinguishing features within the global landscape of action-oriented fiction. Ultimately, Baki-Dou transcends conventional martial arts storytelling. Its sprawling arcs, intricate factual grounding, visual intensity, philosophical depth, and cultural resonance converge to create a meditation on human capability, morality, and ambition. Strength is portrayed not as a fixed achievement, but as an evolving interplay of observation, adaptation, understanding, and moral reflection. Every battle illuminates new aspects of human capacity, every confrontation redefines dominance, and every interaction offers insight into identity, legacy, and the perpetual pursuit of self-mastery. Through Musashi, Baki, Yujiro, sumo practitioners, and underground fighters, Baki-Dou constructs a vast, endlessly evolving ecosystem of narrative, fact, and philosophical inquiry, providing a reading experience that is simultaneously exhilarating, intellectually profound, and limitless in scope. As Baki-Dou unfolds, the series increasingly illustrates that combat functions not merely as spectacle, but as a complex reflection of human existence, societal constructs, and the philosophical exploration of limits. The underground arena, central to the narrative, is no longer just a stage for physical dominance. It becomes a crucible in which history, ideology, and personal ambition intersect, forging and exposing the deepest aspects of identity and morality. Each engagement operates on multiple levels simultaneously: the immediate clash of bodies, the strategic anticipation of each opponent's decisions, the intricate psychological interplay of fear, aggression, and intuition, and the symbolic resonance of competing philosophies, traditions, and worldviews. As Baki-Dou unfolds, the narrative increasingly emphasizes that combat is not merely a physical contest, but a complex exploration of human potential, psychology, and cultural legacy. Each duel, whether in subterranean arenas, traditional sumo rings, or improvised environments, is simultaneously a physical struggle, a psychological battle, and a philosophical discourse. The fighters are not merely athletes, but living embodiments of history, ideology, and evolving human capability. Every movement, reaction, and counterattack carries multiple layers of meaning: the immediate impact on the opponent, the strategic positioning within the ongoing fight, the mental calculus of anticipation and intuition, and the broader symbolic resonance of cultural heritage, ethical considerations, and existential reflection. In this way, Baki-Dou transforms combat into a multidimensional examination of humanity itself, showing that every strike or maneuver is both literal and metaphorical. The inclusion of Miyamoto Musashi serves as a central axis for this exploration. In the story, Musashi is resurrected through advanced biotechnological means, granting the modern world access to his unparalleled skill, knowledge, and philosophical insight.
Unlike contemporary fighters, whose abilities are bounded by modern rules, physical safety, and ethical constraints, Musashi embodies a pure, unfiltered form of martial mastery. Every action he takes is informed by centuries of lethal experience, and every decision is decisive. Hesitation or error carries irreversible consequences. Musashi's presence challenges Baki and others to re-examine assumptions about strength, adaptability, and ethical responsibility, demonstrating that ultimate skill is inseparable from precision, timing, and philosophical understanding. His role highlights the intersection of historical mastery with contemporary ingenuity, creating a framework in which past and present collide to redefine notions of superiority. Factual grounding in Baki-Dou is meticulously maintained even amid extreme exaggeration. Techniques involving joint manipulation, leverage exploitation, pressure point targeting, and dynamic movement are described with anatomical accuracy and biomechanical insight. This careful attention to detail allows the manga to sustain plausibility even as it portrays feats that exceed conventional human limits. Readers can appreciate these sequences not only as visual spectacle, but also as studies in human movement, strategy, and adaptation. By integrating martial arts theory, historical knowledge, and biomechanics, Itagaki transforms extreme action into both entertainment and educational exploration. The sumo arc exemplifies the series' attention to cultural and philosophical depth. Sumo wrestlers are depicted as living repositories of centuries-old ritual, discipline, and lineage. Each movement, from stance shifts to explosive pushes, is deeply informed by tradition and cultural heritage. In contrast, underground fighters embody pragmatic innovation, synthesizing techniques from multiple martial arts traditions and adapting dynamically to novel combat situations. The tension between these two approaches, ritualized preservation versus adaptive creativity, forms a narrative dialogue about the value of history, the necessity of evolution, and the multifaceted nature of mastery. Each confrontation becomes both a literal contest of strength and a symbolic engagement between philosophy, strategy, and cultural identity. Critically, the narrative resists simplistic interpretations of superiority. Sumo wrestlers' immense power and disciplined training provide undeniable advantages, yet their predictability can be exploited by innovative, adaptive opponents. Underground fighters' creativity allows them to bypass rigid structures, but their lack of systemic discipline leaves them vulnerable under sustained pressure. This nuanced treatment ensures that every battle is intellectually stimulating as well as physically exciting, emphasizing that mastery is situational, dynamic, and multidimensional. Analysts and reviewers frequently highlight these sequences as prime examples of Itagaki's ability to balance philosophical depth with action spectacle, creating combat that is intellectually rich as well as viscerally thrilling. Baki Hanma's evolution reflects this thematic complexity. Previously focused on surpassing Yujiro Hanma in raw power, Baki now pursues understanding, observation, and strategic mastery. He observes Musashi's historically perfect techniques, studies the disciplined techniques of sumo, and analyzes the adaptive innovation of underground fighters. Victory becomes a matter of comprehension, integrating observation, instinct, and strategic thought. Baki's growth underscores a core theme of Baki-Dou, that true strength is inseparable from knowledge, awareness, and ethical reflection, not just brute physical prowess. Yujiro Hanma remains the apex reference for ultimate power, embodying evolutionary, physical, and psychological supremacy. However, Musashi's reintroduction challenges this hierarchy, presenting an alternative model of ultimate mastery, grounded in historical precision, decisiveness, and philosophical clarity.
The interaction between Yujiro's apex dominance and Musashi's perfected dueling spirit suggests that power is multidimensional, context-dependent, and influenced by philosophy, experience, and ethical perspective. This conceptual tension deepens the narrative's intellectual complexity and invites readers to reconsider traditional definitions of supremacy. Artistically, Baki-Dou continues to push the limits of exaggeration while maintaining symbolic coherence. Muscles, tendons, and veins are rendered with meticulous precision, conveying not only physical strength, but also the psychological intensity of combat. Impact frames distort perspective to illustrate kinetic energy, while facial expressions capture extreme focus, aggression, and existential tension. While polarizing, this visual intensity reinforces the series' central theme: the pursuit of perfection and the extremity of human potential demand extraordinary physical and mental exertion. Culturally, Baki-Dou continues to thrive globally, largely through streaming platforms like Netflix, which have introduced the series to new international audiences. Fans analyze fights, dissect techniques, debate psychological strategies, and explore philosophical and ethical questions raised by the series. This interaction demonstrates the franchise's ability to engage audiences not only visually, but intellectually, sustaining relevance across decades and geographic boundaries. The combination of narrative innovation, visual intensity, and layered philosophical exploration ensures that Baki-Dou operates simultaneously as entertainment, cultural artifact, and intellectual stimulus. Philosophically, the series presents ultimate strength as an evolving, multidimensional construct. Musashi embodies historical mastery, precision, and decisiveness. Sumo wrestlers reflect disciplined tradition and ritualized excellence. Underground fighters exemplify adaptive ingenuity. Baki represents strategic synthesis and cognitive integration, and Yujiro epitomizes evolutionary apex dominance. Collectively, these characters establish a conceptual framework through which the narrative examines power, morality, mortality, and human potential. Every fight is simultaneously a physical contest, a psychological study, a cultural reflection, and a philosophical meditation. Factually, the franchise demonstrates extraordinary continuity and adaptability. Over 30 years, it has expanded in scope while maintaining thematic coherence, integrating historical references,